Hello, welcome to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For this upload, we will be reading 1 Samuel chapter 18. I did want to demonstrate a feature that I stumbled on while on this website, BibleGateway.com. The website does offer the option to display multiple translations of the same chapter online. The difference with this in Bible Ref is we cannot isolate the verse the same way we can here on Bible Ref. But if you're on Bible Gateway and you would like to display a parallel or another translation, you would go to this icon right here, click it, and you can use the arrow to choose which version. So I thought that was cool. 1 Samuel chapter 18. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand, as at other times. And there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him, and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. And Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. And David said unto Saul, Who am I? And what is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel the Mahalathite to wife. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they took Saul, and the thing pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. And Saul commanded his servants, saying, Commune with David secretly, and say, Behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spake those words in the ears of David. And David said, Seemeth it to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man, and lightly esteemed? And the servants of Saul told him, saying, On this manner spake David. And Saul said, Thus shall ye say to David, The king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins and gave the men full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass, after they went forth, that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. Okay, so to review, we are still discussing Saul's reign as the second king of Israel. So this is why I'm going to go back to 1 Samuel chapter 8. So remember, Abimelech, Gideon's son, in Judges chapter 9 is Israel's first king. In Judges chapter 2, verse 18, God's leadership style was through appointing judges. The leaders led Israel according to God's command. Samuel is the current judge. 1 Samuel chapter 8, Israel demands a change in leadership. Samuel's wayward sons contributed to this request, but verses 5 and verses 20 in 1 Samuel chapter 8 confirms that Israel is more concerned with being like the nations around them. 1 Samuel chapter 9, God tells Samuel Saul is the new king. 1 Samuel chapter 10, Samuel anointed Saul privately and announces Saul as Israel's new king in a public ceremony. 1 Samuel chapter 11, Saul threatens Israel to participate in war. They are victorious over the nation of inbreds, the Ammonites, the children of Ammon. Those are the descendants of Lot and his daughter in Genesis chapter 19. 1 Samuel chapter 12, Samuel gives Israel an opportunity to address or discuss any complaints with his leadership as judge, as he's making the transition to give Saul leadership. 1 Samuel chapter 13, Saul's son Jonathan destroys a Philistine military base. Israel is scared into hiding. Saul makes a sacrifice to God, hoping to gain back Israel's confidence, and this sacrifice was not authorized. 1 Samuel chapter 14, Jonathan attacks the Philistines again. His confident victory influences the Israelites that hid in the previous chapter to rejoin the Israelite army. Even Hebrews that were not associated with the nation of Israel, but they had previously joined the Philistines, they even aligned with the Israelites under Saul's leadership. 1 Samuel chapter 15, God instructs Israel to destroy the Amalekites completely, including animals. Genesis chapter 36, verse 2 lists the Amalekites as descendants of Esau and his Canaanite wife. 1 Samuel chapter 16, God chooses David to be Israel's new king privately. 1 Samuel chapter 17, David famously defeats Goliath. Now we're here at 1 Samuel chapter 18. King Saul embraces David as his own son and gave David a prestigious leadership position. Saul's jealousy is ignited when the Israelite women celebrate Saul by saying he has slain thousands, but David has slain tens of thousands. David plays the harp to calm King Saul when he becomes vexed by an evil spirit. King Saul tries to kill David with a spear twice. King Saul agrees to give his oldest daughter's hand in marriage to David, but changes his mind. He agrees to give his younger daughter's hand in marriage because he thinks this will make David a target of the Philistines. Saul requires David to bring 100 Philistine foreskins to marry his daughter. David brings King Saul 200 foreskins. We learn that Saul's daughter loves David, and even the Philistine princes are impressed with David's wisdom. 1 Samuel chapter 18. I know I usually use Bible ref, but I'm just going to see what this is like. I guess I don't completely read from this anyway. So in verse 1, David impressed Saul because we remember the previous chapter, David slew Goliath with nothing but some stones. And Goliath, even though he had this long history of being a war hero. He was taller than everyone else. He had armor from head to toe, and he also had an armed guard walking in front of him. He was still defeated, and David cut his head off with his own sword because he didn't have a sword. So, after this victory, Saul is genuinely impressed. David already works for Saul as a harp player, but the way that it was written and the previous chapter, it's sort of like he doesn't really know that much because David is a youth. He's like just a cute little kid. No one really knows that much about him because he just has a lowly position. But after he defeats Goliath, now Saul is interested in him. So it says that he loved David as his own son. Oh, I'm sorry. Jonathan was bound to David in close friendship, not Saul. So Saul and David made a covenant for David to live with Saul in verses 2 through 4. Verse 5, David verse 5, David was placed in a leadership position. He behaved well and was respected among Israel. Verses 6 through 9, women came to meet David, dancing, singing, and celebrating. And they say that Saul has killed thousands, but David has tens of thousands. This makes Saul jealous. So Saul already has a problem with fear, sidebar. In 1 Samuel chapter 10, when he was supposed to attend the ceremony with Samuel, he was hiding and he had to be retrieved to participate publicly in being announced as Israel's new king. He also lied to his uncle in that chapter because his uncle asked him, where have you been? He didn't tell him that he was anointed to be king. 1 Samuel 13, this is when Saul's son Jonathan attacks the Philistine military structure. There's always been this contention with the Philistines, so now they're angry again with Israel, and Israel runs and hides. And it even says that they were hiding in, some versions indicate that the Israelites that were hiding were in tombs, graveyards, just trying to hide to get away from the Philistines. And to resolve this, Saul, out of fear, makes an unauthorized sacrifice without Samuel's guidance. 1 Samuel chapter 14, King Saul's son Jonathan attacks a Philistine military structure again, but he's successful. And even there was a time before he was successful in chapter 14 where it was unclear if Jonathan was going to be successful. It was only him and one of his assistants. And so while it was unclear, Saul called to have the Ark of the Covenant brought out to help give Israel an advantage over the Philistines, even though we saw in 1 Samuel chapter 4 that did not help the Israelites when they were fighting the Philistines before, and they needed a vain token, or they used a token that was purely vain because they were not honoring God. They just sort of took an emblem. They were taking the Ark of the Covenant like it was just a four-leaf clover or something when they didn't have any, dedication to God with it. And they lost miserably in 1 Samuel chapter 4. Actually, let me look that up. Yes, the people sent to Shiloh. Yeah, so that's 1 Samuel chapter 4. So Jonathan was successful, and the Ark of the Covenant was not brought to that camp. But again, it's just demonstrating Saul's fearful nature. And so that fear is now, that insecurity, that fear is now turning into jealousy because he sees David isn't like that. 1 Samuel 15, King Saul was instructed to completely destroy the Amalekites, and they are the descendants of Esau and his Canaanite wife. And I did go into a, I did note that uh, the reason why they were supposed to be, completely defeated. Well, the Bible doesn't specifically state why, but when we look at Deuteronomy 7, Moses lists the Hittites in verse 2 to say to utterly destroy them. And again, Deuteronomy is Moses talking, and he does say some things that are not completely correct. So when you reference Deuteronomy, you also need to reference another part of the Bible where God speaks directly. So that part of the Bible, Exodus 23, the Hittites, God commands Israel to drive them out when you get into this promised land. But again, this command was after Esau had already produced this tribe, but um, he produced the tribe with a Hittite woman who's also a Canaanite. Leviticus 18, don't behave as the Egyptians or like the Canaanites. Uh, the people who did these things caused the land to be sick in Leviticus 18. And then Leviticus 19, the land was so sick from the sexual immorality that was occurring on that land that the Israelites were not going to be able to eat the crops until the fifth year once they crossed over and started living in Canaan. That's Leviticus chapter 19. So, for that reason, for all of those references, that may be why God commanded Israel to completely wipe out the Amalekites. Um, and so sometimes when we see, again, people, sometimes you will hear when people are discussing God or a critique of the God of the Bible is that God is so warlike, he wants to destroy things. Uh, Humans like to moralize God, and God is the law and God is above the law. So if he commands something on his earth that he has created, then it is correct. And we as humans do not get to tell God what is moral. Okay, so again, we've demonstrated Saul's uh, insecurity and fear. And then we've also demonstrated in 1 Samuel 15 that when he was instructed to completely destroy a group of people because of the other scriptures that we referenced, he didn't do that because he saw that some of the animals were good, and he let King Agag live. And he admitted to Saul that he was afraid to be stern with Israel and to keep God's command. 1 Samuel 17, David is talking about, oh, that's not never mind. That's not what happened. I had to read that again. So we see this when we get here, the woman of Israel views David as a greater hero than Saul, and Saul becomes jealous. And then verse 10, we see that an evil spirit comes upon Saul, or, you know, rushed upon Saul. I've said this before, a harmful spirit from God. We have to always remember that someone is saying a harmful spirit came from God. God did not say himself that he sent an evil spirit. So we have to remember when we are reading people's accounts. We are reading people who are imperfect and people who mean well, even myself, who are wanting to discuss the Bible. We all tend to say things that maybe God didn't say, or we all tend to have the factor of human error in what we say. So we have to understand that these writers are the same way. If God doesn't say something specifically, you have to understand that that's not a command from God. God didn't say he sent a harmful spirit. So, Saul tries to kill David twice. So this is verse 11. Verse 12, Saul is afraid because he realizes that God is with him. So we have to just He's an employee. This is a terrible, toxic work environment, by the way. He has a job with the king. He does a really good job, and the king is still trying to kill him. The king even knows that God is with him, and he still wants to kill David. I think there's a scripture in the Bible that says jealousy is as cruel as the grave, but I want to make sure who said that and what context. But verses 13 through 16, Saul gave David another position as leader over 1,000 people. David was a good, respected leader, and this made Saul mad again. The point of him giving him this promotion was to hope that he would be, to put him in danger. But instead, it made Israel respect him because he led the troops. We get here to verse 17. Saul tells David that he's going to give him his daughter, his oldest daughter, but then decides not to at the last minute. But then decides in verse 19, I'll give you my youngest daughter, because he's thinking that this act and telling him to, he also tells David, you need to bring me 100 Philistine foreskins as the dowry price. Instead of giving me money, give me 200 foreskins of the Philistines. And so he's thinking that this is going to put David in danger again, which it doesn't. David doubles it and brings him 200 foreskins. Want to point out there was no antibacterial hand soap back then. There was no fingernail brushes. So 200 foreskins. There was no law right now regarding sex before marriage. So these men really had to love these women. Just throwing that out there. And then we see in verse 30, the Philistines were impressed with David. Instead of putting him in danger, the Philistines were impressed, just as Israel was. Highlights: this is a toxic work environment. Again, for the second time. Though David is doing well and he's successful and he follows directions completely and he shows up on time, he's still trying to kill David. He tried to kill David twice because he's jealous of him. Also, we see that King Saul has a higher ranking, a higher position than David. He can command David to do whatever, but you see he's still very jealous of David. Just like we saw Goliath. Goliath is much more capable than David, but he still wants to instill fear in David. There's something to that. Nothing is new under the sun, and I personally believe these type of scenarios are repeated over and over again. Just because someone has a lot in this life doesn't mean that they are not subject to these intangible things like jealousy, insecurity, fear. Those are things that money can't change. Okay. That is all for 1 Samuel chapter 18. Thank you for watching. I love you. Have a wonderful day.